Flat Stanley's Worldwide Adventures, Book 6, The African Safari Discovery. Created by Jeff Brown, written by Josh Greenhut, and pictures by Mackie Pimentuan. Chapter 4, On Safari. Instead of falling, Stanley shot upward. He struggled to make his body like a skydiver's, parallel to the earth. But when he did, the wind only lifted him higher, like a piece of paper in a breeze. He was too flat. Stanley could see the bloom-like parachutes of Arthur and his father far below. I have to get closer, he thought. He pointed his arms downward and his body followed. Stanley's feet flapped in the wind as he dived down. Within seconds, he had reached his father and brother, slowly descending in their parachutes. He waved at them excitedly. Mr. Lambchop's eyes widened. He shook his head frantically and pointed toward the ground. Stanley looked down and saw the yellow land zooming up at him. He was way too low and falling fast. He had to slow down. With all his might, Stanley bent over and grabbed his feet with his hands to make his body into a parachute. But instead of catching the wind, he lost control. His body flipped this way and that, blown in wild spirals toward the ground. Stanley couldn't stop. He was going to crash. The blades of tall grass rushed up at him. Stanley covered his head with his hands as he slammed to the earth. Stanley coughed amid a cloud of dust and felt the ground with his hands. He couldn't move his legs. As the dust settled, he saw what had happened. He had crashed feet first into the soft earth, his legs plunging deep into the soil. He pushed the ground with his hands, and his lower body slid out like toothpicks stuck in a sandwich. He bent his back, flexed his arms, and wiggled his toes. Everything seemed to be in working order. Stanley jumped to his feet. Boy, was he lucky. Being flat had saved his... The grasses directly to Stanley's right rustled. Then he heard a low growl, and a tuft of brown fur poked out from between them. A lion was staring right at Stanley. Stanley held his breath. In school, he had learned how animals protected themselves from predators by blending in with their surroundings. Maybe if the lion sees only my side, Stanley thought, I'll look just like another blade of grass. The lion slowly circled in front of him. Stanley inched his narrow side around to face it. The lion stared and stared. It stared some more. It shook its head. Then it turned around and disappeared back into the bush. Stanley allowed himself to breathe at last. It had worked. For the second time in as many minutes, being flat had saved his life. Stanley! His father came plunging through the grass with Arthur close behind. Mr. Lambchop lifted Stanley in the air and swung him around, Stanley's legs flying. I told you he'd be all right, Arthur grinned. My goodness! Mr. Lambchop hugged Stanley tightly. I was worried. I'm okay, said Stanley. A lion almost ate me, but I tricked him. What? Said Arthur and Mr. Lambchop. Stanley told them all about what had happened since he jumped off the plane. As Stanley finished his story, a herd of zebras appeared nearby, their heads visible above the grasses. Hey, Stanley, Arthur said, raising an eyebrow. Want to play camouflage some more? Because I have an idea. Arthur told Stanley and their father to collect the tallest blades of grass they could find. Then he attached them to his parachute and helped Stanley drape the whole thing over his shoulders. When Stanley held his arms out like a bat, he looked just like a long stretch of grass. Arthur showed Mr. Lambchop where to make some holes with his pocket knife. We're ready, said Arthur, surveying their work. He and their father gathered behind Stanley and peeked out through the eye holes. Together they crept towards the zebras. The animals' black and white stripes blended into one another. Stanley almost couldn't tell where one zebra ended and another began. Awesome, whispered Arthur. A few of the zebras swung their heads in the direction of his voice. Their mouths munched grass intently. Stanley had always wanted to go on a safari, and he couldn't imagine one better than this. The sun was golden. They saw two leopards fighting. They spied a baboon eating insects. They stumbled upon a herd of wildebeest sunning themselves. And then an elephant walked right in front of them. Stanley? Arthur said in a soft voice. Yeah, said Stanley out of the corner of his mouth. The elephant's feet were the size of pizzas. Maybe while we're here, I can get the elephant to flatten me too. Stanley strained not to giggle. Well, if you boys are both going to be flat, Mr. Lambchop whispered, putting his hand on Stanley's shoulder, then I suppose I'll have to try it too. As the elephant raised its trunk to let out a trumpet-like roar, Stanley could not have felt happier.